Good evening, and welcome to Temple Israel's Waxman Memorial Program. My name is Mark Katz, and I am the chair of the Waxman Memorial Committee. And on behalf of Temple Israel, I'd like to welcome everyone to this significant event. To begin our program, I'd like to present the members of the Schechter School Choir, Kol Az, and their director, Lana Stein. Sons and the two sons of former Temple Israel Vice President Veronica Lurvy became close friends at Schechter, and so too did their parents. During the Neutra's bleakest days, Veronica and so many of the people here tonight stood by them in every way. I'd like to call on Veronica to speak of her friends, the Neutras.
Thank you, Mark. Without you, this event would not have been rescheduled, and you have done so much work for it. Thank you for everything. So hi, everyone. We are here to bear witness and to honor the memory of Omer Neutra, son of Orna and Ronen Neutra. I've been asked to speak on behalf of the Lurvy family as Temple Israel members with a long connection to the Neutra family, and I am honored to be so. The connection between our families began when our younger son, Sam, transferred to the Schechter School of Long Island. And we were remembering with Orna just earlier how they bonded over let's call it a nerdy interest in all things bookish and scientific. That was many years ago, and our families have been connected ever since. We have served as class parents and on school committees, hiked, played pickleball. It was actually Ronen who taught me how competitive pickleball can be. We have celebrated simchas, shared holidays, even sang karaoke in Hebrew. The Neutras are beloved members of the Schechter community. It's heartwarming and really a testimony to how much the community cares for them and how deeply Omer affected the community, to see how many of his friends, classmates are here tonight, as well as educators and family friends who will never stop loving him. I want to suggest something tonight. Each of us in this room, whether you met the Neutras before or after October 7th, are part of the same fabric, connected in the same ways. You see, if you've chosen to send your child to a Jewish day school or a religious school or after-school religious classes, bar and bar mitzvah classes, then you also understand the commitment to transmitting precious Jewish identity to the next generation. If you've built a life between two cultures, and I know this speaks to many of you in this audience, those of you who speak multiple languages, who carry multiple homelands and sets of memories in your hearts, then you also understand something of what the Neutras carry. And you may begin to understand what it was that drew Omer to spend a gap year in Israel, a decision that would define the rest of his life. And finally, if you care about the future of the Jewish people, if you donate to Jewish causes, if you attend rallies, have worn a yellow ribbon or a dog tag, or simply feel the weight of October 7th in your bones, then you too are connected to this family, to this story, and to Omer. Omer Neutra was a very special young man who brought out the best in people. Able to make others feel at ease, he was also a talented leader, whether on the basketball court, in USY and Israeli youth groups, and in the tank platoon. His smile was infectious, his hummus was delicious, and he loved his cats. Omer Neutra was killed on October 7th protecting the Gaza border. He was 21 years old. Omer's parents, Orna and Ronen, have carried his memory forward with grit, with love, with purpose, and with a unifying voice. A voice that has reached around the country and around the world. The world has watched as they and the other hostage families have called for the release of the hostages until every single body was home. Tonight, as we bear witness to Orna and Ronen, we take an important step toward meaning with the creation of the Schechter Omer Neutra Fund, which you will hear more about this evening from Ofra Hiltzig. So now I'd like to invite you to meet Omer and the legacy that he has left behind. May his memory forever be a blessing.
We had an opportunity to come to the United States, and little did we know that we're going to start a business. We're going to have our children born here.
We embarked on our journey with our new family, which is the Schechter family.
He was the captain of the soccer team, then he was the captain of the volleyball team, then a captain of the basketball team.
He started off at the Mid-Island YJCC, then he went 2 years in Sprout Lake, then USY Wheels, then JNF Roots in Israel, and then he was a staff at Ramon Nayak. He's a person that brings people together, and he does it out of the good of his heart. He went through the process of applying to colleges. He was accepted to a few places. He committed to going to Binghamton. We felt that it would be a good idea to take a gap year. And so he joined a program, it's called Mechina, for Israeli kids before they joined the army.
slowly started to build some internal conflict. Am I going back to university or am I drafting?
And he made his decision.
You don't draft an army mainly because of a culture. You volunteer because you believe it's the right thing to do, and that's what he believes.
Every time he could, he called home, and he put a lot of effort into maintaining it.
He was stationed with his team on the Gaza border. There was a lot of activity generated by the Hamas on the fence. They were throwing all kind of small bombs. They've been in the tanks working 18 hours a day. The night of October 6th, he calls and he speaks with Orna.
Omer was fairly relaxed. He said that it had been quiet on the border.
I'm checking my phone just before going to sleep, starting to read reports on ground attack. So immediately I'm like texting Omer, what's going on? Talk to me. Are you okay? But we never got an answer.
A few hours later, what I'm hearing from high command, most likely he was kidnapped by Hamas. No matter what your political opinion is, why is it so difficult to see that there's a humane crisis here?
And now to devastating news for the parents of a Long Island native believed to have been captured alive by Hamas during the terror attack in Israel on October 7th.
The IDF says 21-year-old Omer Neutra was killed by Hamas in the October 7th attack on Israel, and his body was taken to Gaza.
After his abduction, Neutra's parents really became some of the most prominent faces of the movement to free the hostages.
And now they're on a new crusade to bring his remains home from Gaza.
We pray that this time miracles should happen, and they should happen really quickly.
רק אתה מבין איך לגשת ללב שלי, משכך כל כאב שבי, מרפא את הלב.
I can think of no one better to speak with the Neutras than our own Rabbi Waxman's successor, Rabbi Howard Stecker. Please join me in welcoming Orna and Ronen Neutra.
I want to acknowledge and to thank, without getting specific, just all of the groups that were involved in bringing us here together: the Solomon Schechter community, the Temple Israel community, the Midway community, the AJC community, and really, in so many ways, Omer was a child of this extended community, and so we are all here together. Many synagogues, Am Echad, Im Lev Echad, one people with one heart for this evening. And above all, Orna and Ronen, I want to thank you, Mikol Halev. These past years have been agonizing. One cannot overstate how agonizing they have been. And the two of you, by your own admission, not people who were ever looking for the spotlight, but you had to emerge in the most public way as a tireless advocate, and you are continuing to speak out on Omer's behalf, on behalf of all of the Chatufim and everything that they stand for. So Mikol Halev, Toda Rabba, thank you for being here with us this evening, and please give them one more round of applause. Bevakasha.
I just want to be thankful for everybody that came. We see a lot of friends here, a lot of people that stood by us, our community, and we're really honored to be here. And thank you for hosting this evening. Thank you.
Our honor. So I just want everybody here to understand that Orna and Ronen and we spoke and we identified really some of the themes that we are going to be touching on. So there's nothing that we are discussing that they haven't thought about, spoken about in great detail, and they're going to be sharing all of that with us this evening. So I'd like to begin by asking you to reflect on the emotional journey that you have been on as individuals and as a family. And that journey has had many steps. October 7th, what happened afterwards, the coordination of your advocacy efforts, of course, the discovery 1 year later of what had actually happened to Omer. And please just share as you are comfortable with this supportive crowd who are here, what that emotional journey was like for you.
So just to add to Ronen, thank you. Thank you for being with us from day one. And this short film tried to capture this journey. We made it in November, and that was 2023, yeah. And even then, we were pushing ourselves to make it because in our head, this was going to end any day and Omer was going to be home. And just to think that it took 2 years to get him back, not the way we wanted, and to have all the hostages return is, really hard to believe. But, from day one, like we said in the film, we realized that something terribly wrong happened, and we spoke with Omer on Friday afternoon, 11:30 in the evening. We were about to go to sleep. It was Erev Simchat Torah. We had guests. My parents from Israel were actually visiting with us, and they went to sleep, and Ron and I were putting things away and about to go to sleep ourselves, and we have this, uncontrollable tick to check the news in Israel before we go to sleep. And lo and behold, Ronen is telling Orna, Israel is under attack. And of course, we don't go to sleep, and we're tracking the news. And as the news comes in, we keep, this is where Omer is. No, not exactly. This, the invasion is on the north of the Gaza envelope. It's not exactly where it is. Oh no, it's from multiple locations. And throughout this horrible, horrendous night, the news comes, keeps coming in, streaming in, and we're following it. Of course, we're not sleeping 1 second. And by the time my parents woke up in the morning, we were in full-blown war, and Omer wasn't answering his phone. And initially, we thought that, he's on duty, he's responding, and that's why he's not responding to the phone. But Omer is the kind of child that knew to inform us ahead of time. When things were going to come out in the news, he would, call or send a message, this and this is coming out and I'm okay. And as the hours went by and we didn't hear anything from him, we realized something very wrong was going on, and we reached out to anyone we knew in Israel that had some kind of connection to the military, to the armored corps, and tried to get information. And at the same time, we reached out to our own community. And one of the members of the community was Veronica. I remember reaching out to her and saying, we need anyone who has any kind of relationship to the American government, because from day one we understood that Omer was an Israeli IDF soldier, but he was also an American citizen. And we needed to engage the American government and to inform him. By late Saturday night, we already got news that Omer's tank was found empty on the Gaza border, and that he and his team were most likely taken hostage. And there is, it's the worst place you can be as a parent, but there's no room for emotion. What do we do? What are we doing right now? And remember reaching out to my co-caller and saying, and Ira was also involved in the war at that point, so we were like trying to kind of work together and see what we're doing in that situation, but we said we need to write a letter to the White House. Can you help us with that? And by Sunday night, through the help of different members in the community, this letter was in the hands of Secretary Blinken. And we know that that was the first information that came in about American hostages to the White House. And from that moment on, it was nonstop, until Omer was brought.
So you're asking about emotional roller coaster. It took 2 days to get a knock on the door, and we were informed by a phone call that they came to our previous address that was not updated with the Israeli embassy, and they called us, we're in the wrong place, we have a message for you. So that knock on the door was 15 minutes extended. And we were thinking about the worst. They have very bad news for us. And when they came in, they told us that officially Omer is considered a hostage, which for us was a sign of relief, because the alternative was to be part of the 1,200 knocks on the door that people got in the following days. And we became that exclusive club of 250 families that were extremely worried and extremely anxious to try and get any kind of sign of life from their kid or father or grandfather or daughter. And it was really stressful and very, very hard spot to be. Little did we know that this is going to be extended for over a year just to get something on Omer. But we did get a propaganda video that Hamas published a few days later, quite early on, that shows the member of the tank being pulled out of the tank. Their condition was not known. Omer was there. We asked a friend to take a look at it. We couldn't look at it. And we got a confirmation that it is Omer's team, and they were videotaped and taken into Gaza. And from there on, our own journey on understanding that we have a role here started. And just a few days later, we were on a Zoom call with President Biden and some other American Israeli hostage families that was put together by the White House. And you may want to talk about it a little bit, but a couple of days later, we got a voicemail from President Trump, which we didn't pick up. It went to voicemail. And we're listening to the voicemail, and hi, it's Donald Trump. I heard about your situation. And then he called again. And this time we picked up. And we were pretty anxious. I mean, this was a Biden administration. What do you do as a parent? What's your role? How do you navigate this? And immediately we understood that the only way to deal with this is to keep this issue bipartisan. And that's basically what we asked. At the time, the former president, President Trump, to keep the hostage and the hostage situation bipartisan. And we wrote him a letter shortly after the call, and we said, President Trump, you promised us you're going to keep this issue bipartisan. And we started to work with
the Biden administration.
So at this point, and we're going to be speaking more extensively a bit later about the meetings that you had, because you had significant high-level meetings with President Biden and with President Trump that also involved Prime Minister Netanyahu, and that all of that is really just a remarkably fascinating part of the story. I'm wondering, again, through all of this, did you feel that you were just trying to take the emotions that you were feeling and just so you felt like you had to put them aside a little bit so that you could focus, so that you, I mean, how did you handle that piece of this as all of your fears were still very much on your minds and on your hearts, and yet you had to motivate yourself to be front and center on behalf of this young man and the other Chatufim?
So there were so many decisions to be made and no time. No time to breathe, no time to sleep. The first few weeks, we were on 2 different time zones, living on 2 different time zones. By the time we were laying down, Israel was waking up, and we had to work both fronts. The family in Israel was asking, when are you coming? When are you coming? And at some point we said, we are not coming right now. There are 250 hostages in Israel, and there are many family members in Israel that are doing what they can, but we have a role over here. And how did that role, evolve? Every day. Every day was something else, right? By Sunday, we wrote a letter to the White House. By Monday, there were TV stations knocking at our door. What do you say? He's a soldier. Do you speak to that? Is it going to harm him in any way? The State Department was saying, don't talk to the media. We were speaking in Israel with people that had unfortunate experiences like this in the past, like the wife of the Army pilot Orna Tami Arad, who to this day her husband has not returned to Israel. She said, you cannot be quiet. You owe it to him to speak up. I was silent for too long. I was told not to speak. Same as you are right now, you have to speak. So we went back to the State Department and said, we're going to go out to the media. If you want to speak with us and tell us, give us some guidance, then we'll do that. And that's what happened. We had a conversation about what is a good idea, what's not a good idea. And by October 10th, we were on the first stage in front of the UN. And that was another decision. Do we go on stage? Or we just acknowledge? Do we speak up? And he said, we're speaking up. And it was nonstop after that. Media appearances, the biggest stages in the United States. And we kept saying, it's a sprint that's morphing into a marathon, but, it's a constant sprint. So you really don't have time to breathe, don't have time to think. And I just remember it. I remember myself, just getting into the shower and breaking down in the shower, coming out of the shower and putting it away. Breaking down was a luxury we didn't have.
It was basically every day a decision, what are we doing today to get the hostages back? And through this, we saw a formation of the hostage forum back in Israel. We saw how the hostage situation started and became a political issue in Israel. It was either win the war in Gaza, eliminate Hamas, or bring the hostages. We understood that these 2 things intermingled. We understood that Hamas wants to survive, that there is a survival here of the leaders of Hamas, Sinwar, and we also saw how the politics in Israel played and how there was a survival of a government, that the priorities were not correct. In the beginning of the war, the hostages were not even a defined goal of the war. How can that be? I mean, 250 citizens, most of them taken from their beds or from a festival. Omer was a soldier among 20, I think, at the time, 20 soldiers. So the situation was a little bit different. He was fighting for the country. Nevertheless, its responsibility and the whole Israeli ethos is built that we don't leave anybody behind. And here you have a government that in the beginning at least didn't consider bringing those hostages back as the highest priority. The priority was, let's kill Hamas, let's get Sinwar. That was difficult to watch and difficult to be part of, especially when, of course, we wanted Hamas to be eliminated. Of course, we wanted Israel to win this war. But we understood that the hostages, and at least most of the living hostages, are the priority because they are dying there. And this has to be on top of mind. So our role, as we saw it, was to make sure that the American administration here is with us, understands it, understand the politics, understand the tensions, and puts the hostages as a top priority, and of course support Israel in the war, for sure. And through this, we had to learn a lot, understand who are the players. We couldn't believe it, but both the head of the CIA, the National Security Advisor, and the Secretary of State became the three main people working on the release of the hostages on our behalf. And as such, we had access, the American-Israeli families, we had access to the White House. And we were invited to speak there, something that was very much in contrast to what the other families, the Israeli families, the people taken from Israel, and the soldiers, like our son, that were fighting for Israel, didn't get from their own government in Israel. They couldn't get meetings, they couldn't get time, and they couldn't get top of mind from the government as to this is the priority. Is it or is it not? What's the plan? How are you going to bring them? What's the timeline? All of those questions were never answered.
Right.
And so we had to live with that. And of course, eventually, we went back to Israel. It was November, the first release, just for the first release. And it was also the time where the Congress went on a break.
Yes.
And that's where we decided we're going back to Israel. And that's where I at least participated in the first meeting with Bibi Netanyahu and the families. That was balagan, MS.
Balagan, you said.
Balagan.
Balagan is absolute craziness. In other words, a lot of people were angry. They were expressing, sure.
Flying that down Tel Aviv too.
Right.
At the time from Gaza.
Right. So this was just to give the context. This was November of 2023 already,
yes.
When the first group of hostages were released. And I want to just say, make explicit what is very powerfully implicit. I'm asking you about the emotional journey. Frustration and anger are emotions, right? Mm-hmm. So among the fear and whatever other of those kind of perhaps paralyzing emotions, you are also experiencing frustration and anger along with everything else during the course of this.
Absolutely. Omer was an IDF soldier.
Right.
He moved from here to serve the country. And we felt that, this was not getting the attention that was necessary in Israel.
Yeah.
And I want to say that, Ronen said that was the first time we visited Israel because Congress was on Thanksgiving break, right? So we said, and we had just met with President Biden for the first time. So imagine, just common folk from Plainview, Israeli immigrants moving to the United States, find ourselves in the White House meeting with the American president, together with other American-Israeli hostage families. We were a group of 12 at the time. And we come out of that meeting and we're all elated. We're sure this is going to end now. You know, we've reached the top. This whole saga is going to end now, right? We just met the American president. He's going to do everything that he can and everyone's going to come home. And with that feeling, we said, okay, now we're at the peak. We can go to Israel and see what's going on over there, right? And we're in Israel, and the first release began. And those images, mind you, at the time, we're talking about mothers, grandmothers, little children, 3-year-olds. I remember Abigail was an American citizen. She was turning 4. They were coming home. And we're, of course, mixed feelings again. We know Omer's a soldier. He's a male. He's a young man. He's not coming home now. And then the war broke again, right? So constantly, these ups and downs, this crazy roller coaster of emotions. And as the war continued in Israel, this was an election year here in the United States, right? A lot of things that compete on news coverage, and we feel that we're in this constant, battle with the news cycle to keep this issue front and center, and that is our mission. And that is our mission, and to keep it bipartisan in this election year. Because we know that if it's hijacked by one side, then the other side is not going to be with us. And we couldn't afford that.
So I want to ask you, you had this moment, it was, if I'm getting the timing right, autumn of 2024, when you received the news from the Israeli government about what had actually happened. And can you speak a little bit to what happened within you and how you responded at that time?
So, we were just going nonstop, but at the same time, the Israeli intelligence were working really hard on trying to figure out what happened to Omer. And there wasn't a lot of information. And information that did come in was very murky. And they were hinting, they tried to say this is not a good sign, right? In hindsight, hearing all the stories of the live hostages that returned, we understand that. At the time, we were in denial, and we were thinking to ourselves, well, the Israeli intelligence didn't know much about what was going on in Gaza before the war, so that, Omer's going to come out. We were sure. And then on December 1st, 2024, the second knock on the door. We had a liaison with the Israeli army special unit, special hostage unit. He was, in a relationship. He was our liaison for the whole 14 months. And suddenly he was knocking on our door in plain view. Together with American ambassador in Israel at the time, Jack Lew, who was in New York for Thanksgiving, for a family event, and they were both at our door, and we knew clearly that that was not a good sign. And it was horrible. And he was very stressed. Our officer was very stressed. It's like you have to inform your family in Israel. This was 8 p.m. on a Sunday evening. Our schedule that day, just so you imagine, we had a TV appearance on this right-wing news channel in the morning, Newsmax, yeah. Then there was a march in Central Park. Then there was a tree lighting in a church in Plainview. They wanted to pray with us for Omer's return. We just got back, and here they were standing on our door. And he was really stressed out. You gotta let people in Israel know. You gotta let the family know because it's gonna come out in the news. We can't hold it back. And we were running away from the truth and the reality. And then we asked Rabbi Levinson to come because we really couldn't figure it out. And Rabbi Levinson, he was a rock for us that whole time, up to that point, devastated together with us from the news. And we were trying to figure out what we're doing. We let the family in Israel know, and we thought we were going to get on a plane the next day, and he said, you cannot get on a plane. You can sit Shiva, because think about this situation that we're in, right? We're suddenly being told that there's new intelligence that shows that our son actually was killed 14 months before. How do you even reconcile that? You know, your head, your heart, what do you do with that information? It's really insane. And he was saying, you know, you can sit Shiva, you can decide, because there is no body, so there's no burial service, there's no funeral. You can sit Shiva now, or you can postpone the Shiva for when they bring him back. But even if you do postpone it, people are going to want to comfort you and are going to want to see you now, so you might as well do it now. And you have to do it here in the United States, because whole communities have been following your story and feel connected to Omer, and they're going to want to come and comfort you. So we decided to sit Shiva both, to split it between New York and Israel. And we sat Shiva at Midway Jewish Center, and thousands of people came. People hopped on planes, whole buses of Jewish school kids came, and they were standing wrapped around the building. It was early December in the freezing cold, and they were standing for hours just to stand in front of us and bear witness and comfort us. And they were thanking us for allowing them to do that. Because Omer became a symbol for the hostages and for the war, and they thanked us for allowing them to be with us and express their pain.
I'll just take us a couple of weeks before President Trump was elected. And at the time, he was president-elect. He was not inaugurated yet, and he called us. And we were on the bima, and I'm telling Rabbi Levinson, you got to take me somewhere, I need to talk to Trump. So we ran downstairs to his office, closing the door, and then I took a note that I prepared because I know I'm going to be speechless or whatever, and I told him, President-elect Trump, our son we're just told that he's no longer alive, but we must bring his body back. And you gotta help us do that. We are not gonna stop our fight until we bring Omer to his final resting place on Israeli soil. And you gotta help us do that. Can you promise us that? I said, I'll do my best. And he said, I commend you for your courage and moving on with, not moving on with your life, just continuing the advocacy for the hostages. And I said, we said, it's our culture. We don't leave people behind. And we trust that the US government, together with the Israeli government, will do everything. And I think that's the first time that he heard from a parent or from a hostage family that this is in our culture. It's not over until he's back. And it stayed with him, and we met him multiple times after that, and we kept on reminding him until even the last time, which was in the Hanukkah party on stage, where we were standing, and he invited us this year on stage to speak, because he said, "Oh, you guys, you know how to talk. Come up." And we're like, all of a sudden, "Oh, we're not expecting this." And then he said, "Well, I brought all the hostages back." So I had to confront him and, in a nice way, thank him for everything he did and remind him that at the time there was still Ran Gvili that was left behind, and we can't stop until the last one is there. And we are sure that you will. Right. And I think, what we did and other families did in reminding him and keep on speaking about it made a difference. And of course, our friendship and partnership with Steve Witkoff, that it's a whole story by itself. Right. He understood us because his son, at the age of 23, he also lost him for different circumstances altogether, but he understood the pain. And the one time when he told me, "Ronen, it's over," and I told him, "Steve, you have a grave to go to. I don't. You got to help us have a grave." And he understood that. And from there on, he never told me it's over. Yeah. It's going to be over when you call me and you said, "We got him back." Mm. And exactly like that, it happened. The day they brought him back, Steve called us and said, "Ronen, Orna, we have your boy. Let me put President Trump on the line." And 2 minutes later, President Trump was on the line and he said, "So sorry about the news. We got your boy."
Wow. Wow. That's incredibly powerful. Everything that you have shared. So I'm going to ask now that we speak for a few minutes about the experiences that you had, some of which you shared, but I'll invite you to share other experiences, speaking to top officials, and really what you learned from that. So the phone call with President Trump was extremely powerful, as you described. And I'd like to just take us back to that meeting that you had in the White House with President Biden, and really how President Biden, it's not even a strong enough word, not just invited, but urged you in the presence of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who was there to state your case. So please share what that meeting was like.
So you were referencing a meeting that took place in July, July 2024, where Prime Minister Netanyahu had come to Washington to address both houses. And this was probably 2 months after President Biden had announced what was called at the time the Netanyahu deal, which was after Israel had already gone into Rafah, and there was supposedly a deal on the table that Netanyahu had agreed to, and the hostage families on this roller coaster, which seemed endless at the time, were expecting this deal to be signed because it was approved by Israel, and then Netanyahu kept going back from it. You know, there were different issues. There was suddenly the Philadelphia corridor and different issues that, kept coming up that would make this deal impossible. And Netanyahu had come to Washington, D.C., and the families were very frustrated because he wouldn't meet with them in Israel. And President Biden said, well, that makes no sense, right? These families are coming to Washington, D.C. to meet with the Israeli president, Prime Minister. And he said, I will invite the Israeli American citizens to to the White House and meet with them. And Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted to be part of that meeting. And President Biden pretty much said, ask him, confront him, ask him your questions, and see, because Netanyahu ended up meeting with the families 2 days before that in Washington, D.C., but it wasn't a conversation, and he wasn't taking any questions, he wasn't answering anything. He was pretty much reprimanding the families for even daring to ask when this is going to end and when the torture is going to be over and what the plan is. So during this meeting, we confronted him, and Ronen actually said to him, your whole security apparatus, the Mossad, the Shabak, the chief of staff is saying that the conditions are ready for a deal. And the Minister of Defense at the time, Gallant. And so what does that mean? And his answer was, so they say. And they're not ready for it yet, not yet. And we came out of that room and we looked at each other and we said, we're screwed. And these are people. The Goldberg Polans were in the room. The father of Sagi Dekelchen, Goldberg Poland, the parents of Hirsch, Idan Alexander's parents, and 4 weeks later, Hirsch was murdered together with 5 other hostages in the tunnels. And most of them were supposed to be released. This was a humanitarian release, so that was completely devastating. That was such a blow.
Oh, yeah. I want to, did you have something to add to that?
No, I will never forget Rachel Goldberg-Poland standing just outside the cabinet room, just before we were about to meet with the Prime Minister and President Biden, and she was praying. She was against the wall praying. It was a very powerful moment. She was trying to convey all the energy toward a successful meeting, and we're coming out of there and we're knowing it's not going to happen. This deal is not coming through. And then we started to meet prominent people with influence with the Trump circles, and they're telling us it's going to happen when Trump is going to be elected. That's when the deal is going to happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you got to hold on. Hopefully your son is strong enough. That's what we were told.
Right.
We were invited to speak at the Republican Jewish Coalition meeting. That was September, right after this horrible disaster. Yeah. And, this was right before the election, and everyone was saying nothing is going to happen before the election. And you got to pray for Trump to be voted in, because that's the only way they're coming back. Mm-hmm. And Trump did in fact get elected. And right after the elections, we were trying to figure out who the circle of influence around him was and how do we get to them. And they were very accessible, very different administration. I remember speaking with Steve Witkoff actually the night before we were told that Omer was killed. That was a very optimistic conversation, and the blow was so devastating after that. He was so hopeful and a bit naive at the time too. Very passionate. He felt that this was a calling for him and that his son was, guiding him, and he was going to save the hostages, and he did. He did. But we also knew that we couldn't afford, there was this time frame before the elections and the inauguration, that historically nothing really happens. And in the transition of power also, a lot of information gets lost, a lot of time gets lost. And we knew that we couldn't afford that. and that we needed both administrations to work together and to pass the torch and not to waste time. And so in our last meeting, right after the election, we had a meeting with the National Security Advisor, with Jake Sullivan, and with Brett McGurk, who was managing the hostage negotiations. And we pleaded with them. We said, really, we can't lose time on this. We know how the powers transferred last time around, we all know. And we really need you to reach out to the Trump administration and to extend any help that they need in order to keep this going. And the next day, we were invited to meet with Biden again for the last time in the Oval Office, and he told us, President Trump just sat here 3 hours ago, and I did what you asked, and I said my whole team is here for you, and we will share with you anything that you need because this is too important. And we all know that Steve Witkoff was nominated only a few days later, and he traveled with Brett McGurk to the region, and on the day of inauguration, hostages were released. And at the time, Steve told us, well, we're really working together on this, but don't tell the media because no one's going to believe it. So. Yeah.
I mean, that really says it all, that Steve Witkoff would say, we're working together, we're working bipartisan, but don't tell anybody because people won't believe it. But that really is also powerful, and the notion that this managed to transcend politics, because we all know how fully polarized things have gotten. And so this was a bright moment where politics gave way to principle, and the right thing to a certain degree was done.
I think we understood that it's a lot about the personal connection. Really, all of these people, all of these names are human beings, and if you're able to reach and make an emotional connection, then they can't ignore. And I think another really important piece to this was connecting President Trump emotionally. So he was connected, right? He reached out to us the second week of the war, but that was, one kind of connection. When the hostages started coming out in January. And this is really Ronen's story, so I'm going to let you tell the story.
If you remember well, some of the hostages came back. They were extremely frail, looking like Holocaust survivors. Probably the most famous one was Eli Sharabi, later to write that inspirational book. And he was immediately interviewed on Uvda, the 60 Minutes program in Israel, and I saw the program, and I was so impressed from him and the way he spoke. I immediately wrote Ilana Dayan. She's the host of 60 Minutes, the Israeli 60 Minutes Uvda, and I said, I got to get an excerpt of 1 minute that we got to show President Trump. And she immediately sent me a short clip with subtitles, and I sent it through my contacts to the president. But then we started to say, you know what, there is so much impact if we can bring some of those hostages to meet him. And we're speaking to the hostage forum that normally worked with us very well, and they told us, it's too complex, it's too big, we can't make it happen. Too frail. They're frail, we can't ask them to travel, they just came out of, hell. And we couldn't take no for an answer, and we, through other people we knew, a billionaire landed his airplane, a surgeon from Hadassah, Hotel Shomer, it doesn't matter, a doctor, flew with them, and we brought 6 or so hostages that just came out to meet with President Trump. And I'm calling Steve Witkoff and I'm telling him, Steve, they're on the plane on the way. And he's telling me, Ronen, not a good time. Not going to happen. And he said, if you remember, it was a Friday and President Zelensky was thrown out of the White House. That was that day that I called him. And I said, but they're coming next week. And he said, not a good time. It was a State of the Union address that Trump needed to give. And I told him, Steve, they're on the way. He said, promise me one thing. You're going to tell them that it may not happen. They're going to meet me, but I'm not sure they'll meet President. I said, that's fine. I called them all. We had a conference call with them. We told them, we so much appreciate you coming, but we are not sure you're going to see President Trump. But we'll do our best. And sure enough, they came. We had meetings in the State Department, and against all odds and against a lot of pressure from many different places, including the Middle East, who didn't want these guys to meet President Trump, around 3 o'clock, they marched in and they stood around him. And I think it was the most impactful meeting that Trump had, because he spoke about it, because he understood their situation, he asked them many questions, and he understood the urgency. We got to bring everyone out. No time left. He understood it. We met them a couple of hours after this meeting in a hotel, and we all cuddled and cried. It was a very emotional moment for them, for us, for Ayelet Levy, right, Ayelet, that she told us, Naama, sorry, the daughter of Ayelet, Naama Levy, that met us and told us that she saw us on CNN in Gaza, speaking on the importance of bringing all the hostages back. A lot of emotions, but we knew that we were doing the right thing. We knew that this had to happen, and later on, Steve agreed that, you pushed, but you made it happen.
Kol hakavod. Amazing.
And just to reinforce that, we recently heard Steve speak at a conference, and he said that, the president had invited the released hostages a couple of months ago to the White House to meet. And Steve said that the president, shed a tear, and that's a rare occasion, and that he told him that this was the most meaningful day for him in the White House so far. So, emotional connection. Yeah.
Wow. So, at this time, I would like us to turn our attention to Omer's legacy. And there is, some may be familiar with this. The two of you were educated in Israel. I am certain that you have heard of this poem, written by Chaim Nachman Bialik. It's called Acharei Moti, and I'm just going to read a portion. Acharei Moti siftu kachali, haya ish ur'u einenu od, kodem zmano met ha'ish hazeh v'shirat chayav be'emtza nifseka. After my death, say this when you mourn for me. There was a man, and look, he is no more. He died before his time. The music of his life suddenly stopped. I want to introduce this portion by observing what is so clear to everyone who knows Omer, and that is that Shirat Chaye Omer, that the music of his life continues. And it was a beautiful song, and it had many various melodies that were part of that song. And I want to ask the two of you, please, to reflect, first of all, on the qualities that Omer possessed that you loved and still love.
So this is, for us, this is part of Rabbi Waxman's memorial, but it's also the first Legacy Day at Schechter in honoring Omer. And we spoke this afternoon with Schechter students, middle school and high school, about Omer, and they've been hearing about him so much. And Ronen said that expressed what we feel, that we're inspired by our son, and that we've been charged. And I think I've heard Rachel Goldberg say this many times, that our life here on earth is not determined by what we believe in, by what we think, by what we want, but by what we do. And Omer was a doer. And you say his life got cut short. I feel like he lived 3 lives. We didn't understand it at the time. You know, he was so full of life, so full of life. We talk about him with big words and inspiration, but he loved and enjoyed life with every ounce of his being. Whether it's food that he just loved, you know. We just recently heard from his friends in Israel that he had this new thing where he would meet up with friends for a meal, and he'd say, well, I want my cake first, you know. So he'd have the cake and the coffee and then order the meal. But everything he did, you know, it's like he lived 3 lives at once, you know. Sleeping is for the weak. He didn't need any sleep. I remember myself as his mom in high school, having these typical teenage arguments. Omer, you can't drive to school in the morning if you don't get some sleep. At least 6 hours of sleep. He never slept. And everywhere I'd find him, like, even when he came back to visit occasionally during his service, he came to visit in New York. He keep talking about his bed and how comfortable it is and how he misses his bed, but I'd find him asleep on the carpet in the living room, you know, in full clothing. Because to go to sleep, to put myself to sleep, is just a waste of time, you know. He would just collapse. And that's really, you know, that's how he lived. He was completely, he loved his friends. He was passionate about everything social. He loved these transformative experiences, you know, with USY, with camp, with all these youth programs. He just thrived there, and he grew there, and he evolved. That's where he really evolved as a leader. He found himself in those places. These were really transformational for him. And he writes about it. I can share some of his writing actually in the army, where he shares, you know, how these experiences were transformational for him. You know, that as a young person, middle school, he even struggled a little bit socially. And at Schechter, he found a place where he could be involved and mentored by kids that were older than him. You know, if he wasn't, you know, feeling comfortable with his own age group, then he got involved with older kids. And he was mentored into taking different leadership roles, whether it was at Schechter or at USY, and about being attuned to his own calling and his own voice. You know, it was, and I'll read something that he wrote in the Army. This is when he was in a commander's course. He was talking about finding your why, your sense of purpose, your sense of mission. The most meaningful things in our world exist because of people who acted not for themselves but for others, without personal interests. The force that drives people to contribute to society in that way is a sense of mission. It's what leads people to do things even when they know they won't receive anything in return. When I was in school, there was an educator who had a profound impact on my life. At a time when I struggled socially, he saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself yet. He gave me confidence, support, and a sense of belonging, and he helped me form real connections with the people around me. And as I grew older, he encouraged me to challenge myself, to try new things, and to take more responsibility. Through movements, through the youth movement, sports, leadership roles, he pushed me to become someone who could not only grow himself, but also help others who were struggling the way I had once. And this really reflects on the kind of leader that he became. This was very influential. I learned that leadership begins with service and that the most meaningful lives are built around giving to others, and that's the kind of person I aspire to be. And he writes, at the end of 12th grade, we had a conversation about whether I wanted to do what everyone else was doing or whether I should choose the path that I found most meaningful. And he talks about his decision to move to Israel. All my life, I was an Israeli living among Americans. Throughout high school, I felt that it was my mission to teach my friends and the people around me about the country I love and about the culture that was such a strong and visible part of my home. I took several roles in youth movements and at school that were meant to expose my American friends to the state of Israel. That wasn't easy. Those roles demanded a great deal of work that I didn't always want to do, and even so, I knew that I was responsible for making sure that those activities, lessons, and all of that would happen. And because of that, I didn't allow myself to give up. And after several years of bringing Israel to my friends, I felt that the only way to continue was to bring myself to Israel. And that's what I did. And after a year of experiencing the country firsthand, I reached the same conclusion that so many kids my age in Israel reach. I wanted to give of myself to fund the country that gives me so much. And I decided to enlist because the state of Israel is part of my character, it's part of who I am. And despite this difficulty that comes with it, it must be defended under all circumstances. And he continues to talk about what it means to be a commander and what it means to be a leader, but this explains, some of the way he perceived what he...
Well, it's clear that Omer, once he was part of the Mechina program in Israel, which is a gap year for Israeli kids between finishing high school and enlisting to the army, he was exposed to so many activities and parts of Israel that he didn't know, but also parts of himself he didn't know. He was, for example, volunteering with other kids with disabilities, and we didn't even know about it. We were told later on by some friends that he was so kind to them and so understanding, speaking in their language, that impacted him. And that was just Omer. He was a social animal that just understood whoever is in front of him and how to connect with him, whether it's going to be a goofy action and something extremely silly, or if it's going to be a very serious discussion. Really depends on the situation and the people. And then the same people he met in the Mechina, the people he could fight on the grass, but again get into the study room and speak about the most serious topics, and he loved that. And that's where he started to build his conflict, and where he finally made a decision that he can't come back to Binghamton University in upstate, but he has to stay and he has to do his share. And he took upon himself a pretty hard Maindan. In Israel they call it even black because it's very oily, and they're also wearing a black hat, brunet, the shirion, the tanks, the armed corps. And he really understood that he can stand out there, he can become pretty quickly a commander. He loved technology of the tank, he loved the teamwork, the team spirit, the fast advancement, and quickly became a tank commander, and later on a trainer of other tank commanders, and eventually an officer, which is not very typical to lone soldiers. Lone soldiers usually are coming on a shorter period. They do their share and either they want to go back or they stay in Israel and go to school. While Omer, again, took upon himself to become an officer. He was offered to train new officers because he was so good with people and they identified that, and also with the technology, but he decided this time to say, no, I want my own team. And he got a group of 2 tanks and was stationed on the border with Gaza between Kibbutz Nirim and Nir Oz in a small post called the White House, strangely. And that's where he basically started. He had also a few weeks before that or months before that, but that's where they actually started to perform what he learned, which is to be commanding people and commanding the tank.
He was the serious guy, but I think if you ask his friends that are sitting in the room, he was also the silliest guy around. He had no issues putting himself out there, being the silliest person ever. I'm just thinking about a story that a friend from Israel shared, where she went to see an optometrist, and her irises were diluted, right? And she couldn't see anything, and she needed someone to pick her up. And so her parents weren't around. She's like, who's available? And Omer was home from the army, and he said, I'll come and meet you. And so he's the first person to say, yes, I'll be there for you. But then she said, he called her, and she's like, Omer, where are you? I'm standing and waiting for you on the corner of the street. And he was playing around with her. I'm here, don't you see me? I'm over here, don't you see me? Like, he kept teasing her. She couldn't see anything, So he was this combination of, the most serious and responsible person, but also, yes.
So I have to say, and so of course he grew up a few towns over, but there are very few separations within our Long Island Jewish community, and even just here within our synagogue are somebody sitting here whose daughter got to know Omer at a Shabbaton, at a Shabbat gathering through USY, and he helped her put on tefillin, which just one little instance of the way that he really was able to reach out and to offer his full self and to use his full self to just, as he said, make an impact on other people. I know that we're going to be hearing in a moment about the fund that is being established in Omer's memory and in his honor. And I want to just make the following observation, which is, we say about someone, Yehi Zichro Baruch, which means, may their memory be for a blessing. And those of you who might, forgive the reference, be watching a television series called The Pit, which is about an emergency room in Pittsburgh, know that the lead doctor, Dr. Rabi, is Jewish, and he, in a certain situation, he used that expression, may his memory be for a blessing. And we say it, and I was thinking, what do we actually mean when we say it? And so one of the things I think we mean is that when we think of someone, and we think of their life, and we think of their legacy, and we think of their song, by virtue of our thinking about them, we actually make the world better, the way that they made the world better. So that thinking of them brings blessing to the world. And so when we say about Omer Neutra, Yehi Zichro Baruch, what we are saying is that there are going to continue to be ripples, small and large, of his beautiful neshama that will continue to have an impact within the Long Island community and far, far beyond. So I want to, on behalf of everyone here, to thank you for everything. Thank you for your koach. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for being with us and sharing from your hearts to our hearts. And thank you for including us on your journey. Toda rabah.
Thank you.
us to the next part of our program. And I could say that to Orna and Rona, I don't know how to thank you for doing this, but I do. And that's the next part of our program. The person I'd like to bring up next is someone who I've gotten to know quite well daily, and that's the head of the Schechter School of Long Island, the acting head, Ofer Hiltzik.
Thank you, and good evening to all. The idea of the Omer Legacy Fund, you have heard so much about Omer, and we can go on and on. This afternoon, we actually, for the first time, after many meetings, after many tries of really trying to get our community together, if you would have walked into our school today, you would have felt Omer. You would have seen Omer in action. You would have seen that legacy that we are going to all keep alive. I'm looking at his classmates. It's those classmates that when we got the news and the knowledge of the funeral, one phone call, Ofra, we are going. And yes, they did. Not only did they go, they spoke. And there is one thing you would know about the Israeli army and any decorum. You can tell and you can move whomever you want to, but you don't ever tell a military funeral how and what. I would be remiss if I would not mention Itzik Yanai, our tour guide, our beloved tour guide that made it happen and was able to get our kids together to be with Omer and his family. And about the Legacy Fund, we didn't know where things were going, we didn't know what was going, but we knew one thing: legacy is Omer, and Omer is legacy. And I would like to mention our former president of school, Jeff Schlefstein, who really stood behind it. We sat in an office, we spoke about it, and we just started spearheading it. And about how are we going to go about it, and when will it kick off? And I would like to say a few words about it. It is such an Omer. In every moment of darkness, there is the imperative to find light. Omer was who excelled at discovering those glimmers and nurturing them into opportunities for joy. While we are forever changed as a result of his passing, we are committed to ensuring that the change is both for good and for better. The Omer Legacy Fund. This fund is dedicated to supporting initiatives that align with the values Omer championed and the vision he believed in. This fund will provide resources for school programs and those outside of school that foster community, leadership, and resources for school and true believer of Zionism, qualities that Omer exemplified in his life. By supporting this initiative, the fund ensures that Omer's mission continues to inspire and uplift future generations at the Schechter School of Long Island, and we are thinking about something much bigger than our school, something that brings the entire Jewish community from around the world together. And your presence here today, all those shuls that are here, those Jewish organizations that are here, are true testimonies to whom Omer is. Toda Rabah. Looking forward to hearing more and more and celebrating Omer's life. Toda.
Well, I have to tell you, I've been pestering Orna and Ronen for at least a year to do this program. And not only that, I pulled out all the resources I knew to hit them from a number of different directions and ask them to do this program. And one day, Orna called me up and said, we're ready to do the program. And I thought, I don't know how to thank you, but this is the way to thank you. On that same call, Ronen said, look, we don't want an honorarium to do this. We want to ensure Omer's legacy. That's what we want. And that's what we want to do tonight. We asked the people coming this evening if they would like to support programs like this so that we can continue to do programs like this. And we were astounded by the contributions we received voluntarily. It floored us. And in a meeting of the Waxman Memorial Committee and Temple Israel, we decided that we should not take these funds and put it towards future programs, but rather take all of the funds that you all donated and give it to the Omer Neutra Fund. And so tonight we will be making a major, significant contribution to kick off the Omer Neutra Fund. Before we conclude tonight, I'd like to thank a small group of people who worked very hard in putting together this program. And it was only possible with a lot of dedication and a lot of hard work. And I'd like to thank the people from the Waxman Memorial Committee who really put in a lot of effort. I'd like to thank our Executive Director, Jamie Cohn, who seemed to be working who seemed to be working 24 hours a day because he was calling me and I was calling him 24 hours a day. And I'd like to thank our security staff, led by our own Jerry White, and the assistance of the Nassau County Police Department, who went all out to ensure our safety here tonight. And most of all, I'd like to thank all of you for your generous support and for joining us this evening. Thank you.